All rise. Wave away. Please be seated.
Thank you very much, and witness, welcome back. Madam Registrar has some matter to deal with.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je souhaitais apporter...
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to correct the number for prosecution, exhibit number 47, and the ERN is Ken OTP 00920958. Thank you.
Thank you. That was correction to the right ERN number. Mrs. Steinberg, before you continue, Mr. Can, you requested to speak for 5 minutes, and you said you wanted the matter dealt with. We will not be able to give you the certainty you want today, and since this witness is the last witness for this session, that's the case, isn't it, Mr. Steinberg?
Correct, Your Honor.
Yes. We do not want to interrupt his testimony and hold a status conference in the middle of his testimony. So what the chamber will do is hold a status conference after this witness's testimony, during which time we will look into all this matter, including the one you may be talking about. So it's for you now to decide whether you want to wait until then, since you will not be getting any answer before that time, or whether you still want to do your 5-minute submission.
Your Honor, if it's tomorrow, it'll be fine. I will not be here on Friday. So if it's tomorrow, that would be satisfactory.
But even if you're not here on Friday, I believe one of your colleagues can speak to the...
Yes, they can. Or I can just raise the issue very briefly as well. It's simply relating to witnesses 32 could be brought in to fill the time we have at the next session. It doesn't make sense to come all this way and go to the expense of a hearing if there's one witness only available. And that's the nub of it, but I can expand later.
All right, thank you. We will return to that later. Mr. Steinberg, please continue your examination, Chief.
Thank you, Your Honours. And I can inform the court that the technicians have managed to hook up Mr. Bromley's computer, and in due course I will ask him to pull up one of the images. But it may be more efficient to follow the images we have in his report until such time as we need to get to specific details.
It's in your, we're in your hands, Mr. Steinberg. Please proceed.
Thank you very much, Your Honours. If I can direct your attention, Mr. Bromley, once again to tab 2 to your Eldoret report, and to page 3 of the report at ERN 0935. It's the page opposite figure 1 and has a smaller figure 2 up in the right-hand corner. Do you have that?
Yes.
What does this tell us about the coverage of the 2 images you acquired?
Figure 2 indicates that the 2 images cover slightly different areas. Essentially, the image from 14 March 2006 covers 131 square kilometers, whereas the image from 4 January 2008 covers 140 square kilometers, which is an additional 9 square kilometers. So figure 2 then indicates which areas are essentially not covered by both images.
And if I understand the image correctly, the darkened corners, top right and bottom right, are areas that are not covered by the before picture, as it were, the earlier image.
Correct.
And can I ask my learned friend to call up then figure 3 on the following page? It's tab 0936. And we'll need the floor from my colleagues at CMS, please.
But Mr. Steinberg, the triangles, the dark triangles on the top right and bottom right of figure 2, are you saying that this witness would not be testifying to occurrences in those areas?
No, Your Honours. I will ask the witness to explain in a bit more detail in a moment, but essentially those areas are areas for which he has been able to identify certain destroyed structures, but he's not in a position to say whether those structures were in fact there before the violence. So that introduces a degree of uncertainty into his analysis. But I will go into greater detail in due course.
So that will be delineated on the record when we get to it.
Indeed, Your Honours. And in fact, the way that the witness has annotated the structures he's identified will also indicate that. Your Honours, I believe that my learned friends have called up this image, but what I had requested is that they give the floor to us, the prosecution, so that we may manipulate the image, please. The reason I'm doing this is because we have the original files here, which are of slightly better quality than the files. When they're uploaded into eCourt, the quality is decreased. Do you see that image in front of you, Mr. Bromley?
Yes.
And just to orientate those in court, there are two images juxtaposed. Is it correct? The top image is, as it were, the before picture, dated 14 March 2006 of a particular area, and the bottom image is the corresponding area depicted in as at 4th of January 2008.
Yes.
Now, with the assistance of this image, of these images, I'd like you to please explain to the court how you, through your analysis, were able to identify destroyed and particularly burnt buildings during the course of your analysis.
So, as I mentioned, in this case, the image analysis process is essentially a comparison between the before and the after image. So, as I review the two images in the GIS, you're essentially turning them on and off to compare them to each other directly. When you locate an area where structures have essentially disappeared between the after image and the before image, then you, of course, pause at that location and you try and determine why the structure has disappeared. Obviously, there's quite some time that elapsed between the acquisition of the before image and the acquisition of the after image. So in some cases, structures were temporary and simply removed. In some cases, they may be abandoned and just otherwise disappeared. In these particular cases, I would identify the structures as having been burned. In the examples on the screen in front of you, where the red dots are, these are locations which clearly had structures, and then in the after image, the structures have disappeared. And what you see remaining are essentially artifacts of what I would call, or what I would see as burning. So most visible is a lot of white grayish material lying on the ground, which we can, which I would basically identify as ashes, the ash remains of the structures. A little bit less visible, especially in this area, but much more visible in other areas, would be blackened, charred remains of the structures and surrounding vegetation. So between the disappearance of the structures, their replacement with a white ash-like substance, and occasionally blackened remains, I would classify those as burned structures. Some of them have not burned completely or have not disappeared completely, and then you have clearer structural remains. Oftentimes the roof will collapse, and what you see are the remains of the interior walls of the structure. So it's an analytical process where you're first noting the disappearance of the structure, and then identifying characteristics which indicate which it's likely been burned.
Thank you. If I can direct your attention on the lower image to the first, the four red dots on the right hand, well, the first four red dots from the right of the photograph that are running more or less a horizontal line below the road running from left to right. Do you see those?
Yes.
If you compare those to the corresponding structures on the top image, can you indicate what is what you can tell from the presence or absence of shadows?
So if
Where
you
is the top image?
Sorry, can you zoom down? Make it smaller. Zoom out. Can I pull it down a bit? Sorry, Your Honours, I think you can see both images now. Go ahead.
So if we look at those, that particular area, obviously in the before image the structures are visible. Some of the clues that we look for are on their top edge. They're basically casting shadows. The black lines directly adjacent to the top edge of the structures are shadows. Obviously, when a structure is intact and elevated, it's going to be casting a shadow. The absence of the shadow indicates that the structure is no longer elevated in the bottom image, and essentially nothing is blocking the sunlight and casting the shadow.
Thank you, Mr. Bromley. And referring to those same four red dots on the lower image, just below the white-grey piles which you identified as ashes, there is a black margin around those ashes. What would you identify that as?
So that would essentially be most likely the burned vegetation which was next to the structures, which would have caught on fire at the same time, and it leaves the blackened soot remains.
Thank you. And it doesn't seem to be particularly in dispute, but can you, from this photograph, identify whether these buildings were destroyed by a natural phenomenon such as a wildfire, or rather by a more targeted individual acts of incineration?
It's of course it's an image of an event, so I wasn't there, but I have looked at many other images which depict wildfires, and those essentially burn entire continuous areas. So the fact that there is no the vast majority of the surrounding vegetation is not burned would indicate to me, both in this area and other areas of the image, essentially that the fire was deliberately ignited on the structures piece by piece. It did not spread evenly across the entire area and burn every structure and every item in the area.
And if we continue to the left of the 4 dots we've been looking at, following the line of the road running from right to left, there are 2 further dots and then a space and then a series of 7 further dots going down towards the bottom left-hand corner. Do you have those?
Yes.
And each of those represents a burnt structure, correct?
Yes, some of them are burned completely, and some of them I identified as partially burned.
And Mr. Steinberg, your colleague, whoever is manipulating, can zoom in and out as you're discussing the area, so that we can make certain determinations, if possible.
Just to confirm, Your Honours, you would like the image to be zoomed in so that when we're discussing a particular area. Thank you, Your Honours. And if we look below that line I've identified, there are some scattered red dots below, but in the middle of all of those there's one building which seems to be standing untouched, a long narrow building along the axis of top to bottom. Do you see that?
Yes, to the right of the 7 dots, correct?
Correct. Just below the junction, the Y junction of the road.
Yes.
Can we draw any conclusion from the fact that that building is untouched amongst all the other destroyed, burnt buildings?
Again, that would indicate to me that it wasn't a continuous burn across the area. A wildfire is essentially going to have a front, like a weather front, which would move with the wind and burn evenly across the area. This is what, in my analysis, we would call selective burning, where certain buildings are burned and other buildings are untouched.
Thank you. And from your analysis of these images, are you able to give any indication of a time frame when these buildings were destroyed by burning?
That gets much more difficult, but just essentially by simple logic, you know that ash will blow away quite quickly. I would say, depending on the wind conditions, it's going to be gone within a couple of days, 2 or 3 days, something like that. The fact that you're still seeing ash in the location would indicate that it's a very recent event.
And can any conclusions be drawn from the blackened vegetation, the color of the blackened vegetation as visible on your images?
Again, that's much more difficult and relatively speculative, but especially in other areas of the image, the blackened vegetation, when it's a pure black, a deep black, that's a very recent burn. As time goes on, the black fades away, and as new vegetation grows, eventually it disappears altogether. And again, the example isn't very abundant in this particular section of the image, but in other areas of the image, you see the blackened remains are extremely they're pure black almost. They're not they haven't faded to a dark gray or a light gray at all.
when you refer to other areas of the image, are you referring to the image before us or the larger image that you examined?
The larger image, essentially the surrounding areas outside the frame of this particular figure.
Thank you. We'll return to some examples of that in due course. Now, the degree of certainty, can you tell the court the structures which you've represented as red dots, the degree of certainty by which you can say that these are burnt structures?
Certainly the structures that have completely disappeared, I would certainly call them burned structures. The majority of the others, just given the blackened char marks on some of the roofs, the holes in the rooftop, which is characteristic of burning, those are certainly almost certainly burned, in my opinion. Some of the others, there's certainly a little bit of speculation, at least for the smaller structures where they appear to have lost a rooftop but may not exhibit other signs of burning. There's some uncertainty on those, but in general, you would view the whole area and say, okay, if every building is burned and the building next to it appears damaged, then it's most likely a burning.
Thank you. Now, the President asked you before the break whether or not you were able to hook up your system to show the Chamber how you go about examining it on your bespoke. I understand you've managed to do that during the break. Is that correct?
Yes, I have, or we have.
Perhaps just at this stage, if I could ask the floor to be given to the witness, and if I could ask you to call up the same image, or the image of the same area, just to give the Chamber, I don't intend to do this for every image, but just to give the Chamber an idea of how you are able to view this, bearing in mind the limitations of the screens on which we're viewing it.
Is it in front of everyone else? No, there we go. So what you're looking at here is the full window is the geographic information system, which I mentioned. This is an ArcMap GIS. There are other versions of GIS which are either available for purchase or open source, and you can download. But this is the software that I've always used, that my office use. It's specially designed essentially for map making and geographic analysis. So,
witness, out of interest, is this what we see outlined in red at prosecution document 0934, page 0934?
That would be figure 1 of the Eldoret report.
Yes, figure 1 of the Eldoret report.
yes, so the image area here that I indicate with the cursor is the area inside the red box. The completely black stuff outside is what we call no data. So the software just essentially allows you to zoom in and out. It goes a lot faster on a bigger computer, but this is essentially how it works on a smaller laptop. Anyone who's familiar with Google Earth or something like that has seen something like this. The software has a set of specific capabilities, which something like Google Earth wouldn't have. But essentially, you're able to zoom in and out, look around the image, see the analysis, or see the imagery and do your analysis. I can turn on and off different layers. So what I'm doing now is I'm turning off the image from 4 January 2008 so that I can see the previous image, which is 14 March 2006. Now I'm turning the 2008 image back on, and that's essentially a large part of the analysis process right there. You turn them on and off, you do the comparison, you look for changes between the two. Now you'll notice a slight shift between the two images. That's about a 15-meter shift in the images. That's essentially a relic of the image acquisition process in this particular satellite. In my report, I talk about the processing and rectification stages of the analysis. That's where we essentially work to remove that shift between the two images so that at any time you're turning one on and off, you're essentially looking at the exact same area in the other image. The final sorts of things I can do with the image that you don't do with a PDF. This is the vegetation capability. One second. So, since this was a dry time of year, it's harder to see, but you'll notice the vegetation here has essentially been turned red. This is just a little tool, a little trick that's able to be used to help me more easily identify vegetation versus structures, also live vegetation versus dead vegetation. This is what uses that extra wavelength of energy that the human eye doesn't see. It's the near infrared wavelength of energy, and it's just basically a very good way of differentiating vegetation.
Thank you, Mr. Bromley. Are you able to find the location that was identified on the figure 3 we were examining a moment ago, just so we can have an indication of the differences in what you can see on your system?
Yes, so here it is zoomed out. This is at a much broader scale than what's represented in the report, and we can essentially zoom in. And so as we get closer to it, this is still not full resolution. Down here is roughly the scale that it was presented in the report, maybe a little bit closer. And so, again, this is what we call full resolution of the imagery. At this resolution, you can zoom in more, but it's not really going to offer you any more details. So this is the for January 2008 image. I can alter the color stretch a little bit, just in hopes of perhaps getting a little bit more contrast and detail out of it. And then again, I can turn on and off the different images and do the direct comparison on screen to see the two. And again, there's this slight shift, and this is not present when I do the analysis in actuality on my computer in the office. It's simply because I had to set this up quickly for display here. But it is present in the original imagery because it's an artifact of the original image acquisition. But this is essentially the process. And then I would do my best to identify separate building structures, which is a little bit subjective simply because you're looking for breaks in the rooftops or changes in the rooftops that would differentiate one building from the next. Obviously, if the buildings are clearly separated by a few meters or a meter, that's quite easy. But if the buildings are joined at the rooftops, then it can get a little bit more essentially subjective. So again, we see the shadows of the buildings in the previous image up along here, indicating they're raised, and they're in the after image. The shadows on those particular buildings have disappeared, but the shadows over here are still present. So that tells me the sun conditions and sun position were roughly the same between the two image acquisitions, and all the structures would be casting shadows if they were there.
Thank you, Mr. Bromley. And if I can just go back to that image for a moment, please.
Mrs. Steinbeck, is there ability for this evidence or this testimony to tell us how to zero in on the particular neighborhoods of interest in terms of there had been some discussions about certain neighborhoods where you would have concentration of Kikuyus versus other neighborhoods. That kind of information. Is it possible to get it from this?
Perhaps that would be a question for the witness, Your Honours, but I don't see how.
It wouldn't. It would not be for him. It would be you supplying him the information about the locality to look for. I don't imagine that he would have known where the witnesses, all the witnesses told you Kikuyus lived and that sort of thing.
Your Honours, what I can say is that, as the witnesses already testified, we did supply him with approximate coordinates of 5 of the locations which we were interested in for the purposes of the charges. And those may be seen probably best at tab 6, which is just an A3 printed version of figure 5 in the Eldoret report. And the blue pentagon-shaped dots indicate the center coordinates of Kimumu, Huruma, Yamumbi, and Langas. So I will come to this with the witness, but it is possible to zoom in on those localities if you wish. For my purposes, once I have established how the witness identified definite and possible destroyed structures, we'll come to the possible destroyed structures in a moment, then I would suffice to refer to the larger picture, which demonstrates the layout or the concentrations of those areas vis-à-vis the coordinates provided. So what I'm trying to say is I don't propose, unless the Chamber wishes to do so, to zoom in on each of those individual areas, but it can be done. And
I would think that actually that would have been a very, very useful thing for this witness to have done for us, with you instructing him on what to zoom in on. There has been admissions of burnings, but the defense have not admitted that anybody's property in particular were burnt. They do admit burnings, but it would help us if witnesses are saying, well, there's a certain area where Kikuyu neighborhoods, tendency of Kikuyus to live in those neighborhoods, and less so in other neighborhoods. So if we can zero in on those neighborhoods identified by witnesses as Kikuyu neighborhoods, so we can see whether there is a larger concentration of burnings in those areas comparative to other areas.
Well, Mr. President, I must apologize for intervening at this stage, but that is an area of interest, and I just wish to announce that that is the entire subject of our proposed cross-examination. Thank you.
Your Honours, the report was dated in early 2013, which predated many of our witness statements on the crime base. And obviously, the witness could do that, but he would have to be provided with reliable information and coordinates. Unfortunately, the challenges we've had with many of our witnesses is that they've been unable to identify or understand themselves satellite images or aerial photographs in order to point out where their particular house may or may not have been, which makes it difficult for us to provide that information to the witness. But the underlying information is here, and we propose to admit it before the court. And there's nothing to prevent, at a later stage, if certain areas of interest are identified, for the parties or the chamber themselves to zoom in on those areas. Because what I propose to do, Your Honours, is at the end of the bundle of documents I've provided, there is a CD containing PDF files of each of these reports and all of the images I intend to propose, which can be loaded into the computer and viewed individually by any of the parties involved.
Proceed.
Thank you, Your Honour. One last question, Mr. Bromley, on this witness, on this picture before we continue. I note that the blackened areas above and below the destroyed structures appear on this image, to my eye in any event, much blacker than on the aerial, on the image we were looking at earlier.
I'm sorry, can you clarify that?
Yes, we spoke earlier about the usefulness of looking at blackened vegetation surrounding burnt structures and determining the age of the burn. You recall that?
Yes.
And on the image which the prosecution had pulled up from its PDF file, compared to the image you have on your screen at the moment, can you comment on the intensity of the blackened areas surrounding these structures?
You mean this stretch here?
Indeed, and above the two dots just below the junction, to the left of that.
Again, the software I'm using gives me some capability to alter the stretch. So some of what you're seeing is just the contrast that I selected. I can essentially darken the entire image and then make the contrast a little bit less. But you can certainly tell the difference between shadow, building shadow, and burned vegetation. For example, for one thing, on this, the shadows fall on the north side of the buildings, not on the southern side of the buildings. And it's tough or difficult for me to get the exact same contrast in the image on your screen as what you had in the PDF. But it's possible.
All right, thank you. Those are all the questions I have for your images at the moment, unless there are any further questions from the bench. No. Could we have the floor back, please, Court Officer? Do you have on your screen, Mr. Bromley, now figure 4 from your Eldoret report, ERN 0937?
Yes.
All right. Now, on the previous screen, there were various red dots. We see on the bottom half of this figure certain orange dots. Can you please explain to the court what those orange dots represent?
The orange dots essentially represent possibly destroyed structures. So, as I mentioned, when we do the image analysis, we're comparing a before and an after image. And then I'm looking for buildings which have essentially disappeared in the after that I can see in the before image. However, since so much time has passed since the acquisition of that image in 2006 versus the one in 2008, what you also had was buildings which were built, structures which were built in that time period, and which, according to my analysis, were then also likely burned down. So in this case, the orange dots represent those buildings which I cannot verify that they existed in the before image, but according to my interpretation, they are most likely a building which was burned down as of 4 January 2008. So they are one of 3 types of possibly destroyed structures that I identified. So the red dots are structures, I'm very certain, which were previously existing structures which were burned or otherwise destroyed, and then the orange dots are in this case, buildings which I believe to have been burned down, but I cannot verify that there were structures there previously.
Thank you. And you mentioned 2 other types or categories of possibly burnt structures. What are they?
The other 2 categories, the first simplest one is, as we discussed before, the 2 images covered slightly different areas, with the 2008 image covering an additional 9 square kilometers compared to the 2006 image. So obviously in those 9 square kilometers I also identified possibly destroyed structures, but since I did not have a previous image for that location, I could not verify that the structures had been there. So that's a second type of possibly destroyed structures. The third type is where I had some analytical doubt that the structure had been destroyed. It may have been exhibiting some characteristics of having been burned or destroyed, but either the level of detail of the image wasn't sufficient for me to be certain about that, or perhaps there was some obscurity, like a tree was next to the or near the structure and essentially casting a shadow on it, which would have limited my ability to see the structure. Some factor like that, which gave me some doubt before I that did not allow me to classify that structure as definitely destroyed.
Thank you.
And sorry, did you just say what factors may inform your conclusion that a building was possibly destroyed?
Yes, sir. So again, the red dots are the ones that I would classify as definitively destroyed, and then the orange dots would be the 3 classes of possibly destroyed, with one of those types of possibly destroyed being some sort of analytical uncertainty on my part.
What I'm trying to find out is what would you be looking for to come to the conclusion that possibly destroyed?
I think mostly what you see small holes in the roof, which are blackened, but they're small enough that they're right at the edge of what the sensor can actually see. So there's a chance that it's just not, it's some sort of, perhaps a chimney sticking up from the top of the structure is casting a shadow. And so what I'm seeing is literally just a tiny little black spot on the rooftop. So there are, there are factors like that that would cause me to call it possibly destroyed. Sometimes a structure may partially collapse, but from space it still looks like a relatively square structure, but perhaps it's no longer casting as big of a shadow, or perhaps the configuration, the appearance of the structure has changed slightly, leading me to think that it's collapsed, but I just can't be sure about it from the imagery.
But you first make a determination that there is definitely a structure. Is that the case? And then your question is, this is a structure, but is this structure possibly destroyed or
Correct.
not? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bromley. I think we can then move to the results of your analysis, and this is contained at ERN 0938, page 6 of the report. And can you just tell the Court then, from your analysis of the area covered by the respective photographs, what you were able to detect as far as destroyed and burnt buildings?
So after I completed the analysis which I described, going through the entire image piece by piece until I had covered the entire image, there were a total of 696 structures that I identified as destroyed. Of the 696, I classified 506 of those structures as definitively destroyed. So those were ones where there was no doubt, there was no gap in the imagery. And then the additional 190 structures were possibly destroyed according to the criteria that we discussed.
With regard to the definitively destroyed structures, with regard to the total figure of 696 destroyed buildings, you go on to say almost all apparently by fire. What sort of ratio are we talking about of buildings that were not destroyed by fire but by some other cause?
To be certain, I would have to go back and review the data, but it was, 85, 90%, something like that.
Thank you. Now, I note towards the end of that paragraph that you refer to certain other information you managed to gather relating to the remains of a possible roadblock made from burning tires, a burnt cargo truck, and certain areas of people navigating the town on foot. For my purposes, the roadblock is of interest. And perhaps I could ask you to, if my colleague can call up the relevant page from the atlas, unless you are able to find it on your GIS system.
It's probably safer and faster if we use the atlas page.
Very well. So then I'm going to ask my friend if we have the floor to go to the Appendix C, the annotated Atlas of Eldoret, and it's, according to footnote 9, in quadrant G3 of that document.
What page?
For the record, it's Ken OTP 00921051 at tab 10. But it will probably be more visible on the screen. Is that the relevant page I've just referred to, Mr. Bromley?
Yes.
Can I ask my colleague to zoom in on the top right-hand corner? Might be a little bit more visible. All right. Are you able to identify the roadblock on that image? It's moved again. Just 1 second.
Yes.
Can you point it out, please?
It's on, yeah, essentially right there. It's the on the asphalt road. It has some sort of light truck parked next to it, or possibly in motion, but most likely stationary. And it's the black line across the road.
Just for people who are subsequently reading the record, the witness points to a spot in the top right-hand corner of this image, just below and to the left of the intersection of the black latitude and longitude lines on the asphalt road running diagonally from left down to right. Mr. Bromley, what makes you say those are burning tires?
It's somewhat speculative, but we've seen this. I've seen this before. Essentially, it's the black charred remains of something that was put across the road. The fact that if you really look closely at them, they're elongated in a certain direction, which is essentially the black soot that billows off of a burning tire or something like it, and all that is going in the same direction, which means it's probably from wind pushing it in a certain direction.
You call it the remains of a roadblock. Is there anything to suggest to you that it's not an active roadblock?
It certainly could be. It's difficult to tell since the substance that you're looking at is black. Any shadow that you would be seeing in there would essentially be absorbed into the sub. It would be difficult to distinguish from the substance itself. The fact that there is a vehicle at the angle that it's positioned might indicate that it's an active roadblock.
Are you able to comment on the presence or absence of people at that location?
There may be a few. That's something I would like to take a closer look at in the GIS. People are extremely difficult to see in imagery of this type. Essentially what you're often seeing is the shadow cast by people. And so what you're looking at are tiny little black dots and trying to assess where those are people. That's something I would prefer to do in the GIS and perhaps report back later.
Thank you. I don't think we need to spend more time on that then. Thank you. You can take that image off. Returning then to your report and to your results, I refer you again to Figure 5. And, Your Honours, this is the same image that we have in A3 size at tab 6, where it has a different ERN number 00920957. So whichever image is clearer to the bench, you're welcome to use. Does this represent then a plot of all of the definitive and possibly destroyed structures that you identified during your analysis?
Yes.
And we've already established that the blue dots indicate coordinates provided for certain areas of interest, correct?
Yes, so those were the original coordinates I was provided, and then I essentially wrapped the image purchase around them, for lack of a better term.
And all of these structures were then destroyed by the 4th of January when the photograph was taken, or possibly destroyed, as the case may be.
Correct.
Now, we'll come to the modus in due course, but while we're looking at this image, what are the red shaded areas, top right, bottom left, and on the left hand, just above the middle of the picture? the shaded red squares, or pink?
So those would be the areas in which a fire detection was, or a fire was detected by the MODIS sensor. So the MODIS sensor is essentially identifying the center point of a pixel where it's assessed, an algorithm has assessed the MODIS data and determined that a fire was most likely occurring in that area at the time of the satellite overpass.
And in red script next to each of those shaded areas, so let's look at the one on the top right-hand corner, there's an ID number followed by a date and a time stamp. Is that correct?
Correct.
And does that represent the date and time when the image or the detection was recorded?
Correct.
Now, and we'll go into the specifics again in due course when we deal with report number 3, but the absence of red shaded areas in places where you have identified burned structures, can we draw any conclusions from that?
So the MODIS sensor, the fire detection sensor, is carried on 2 different satellites, which are overhead any particular point, for a fraction of a second, essentially. So the fact that all the fires weren't detected, all the possible fires weren't detected, doesn't mean they didn't occur. It could mean essentially that they were occurring while the sensors were not passing overhead. In addition, the MODIS sensor essentially detects relatively large fires that have to be burning again when the sensor is overhead. So if the burning does not reach a certain critical mass,
just getting indications you're going a little bit too fast. Could you slow down a little bit, please?
So if the burning does not hit a certain level of intensity, then it may basically just be too minor for MODIS to detect. So MODIS is not designed to detect individual house fires. It's designed to detect larger fires, but when you get multiple fires burning together, that's when MODIS is able to detect them. So essentially, the fact that a fire was not detected does not mean it did not occur. Conversely, the confidence is quite high that the fires that were detected actually did occur.
Thank you.
But how frequently does MODIS overpass?
Basically, it overpasses all areas of the planet at least 2 times per day, and up to 4 times per day. So there are certain gaps and overlaps in the orbital pattern that optimize it so it passes over land as opposed to water, and covers the entire planet in the long term in an even fashion. But there are some days where it does not detect, there's a gap in the coverage. But in general, it's at least 2 times per day and up to 4 times per day.
And while we're on that point, are there any other variables or climatological factors which might affect the detection of fires by MODIS?
For any optical satellite system, cloud cover is the number one thing to consider. Even dense fog and dense haze will essentially block the detection capability. In some rare cases, if the fire that's burning is emitting enough smoke, that will also essentially block the detection capability.
Thank you. As I say, we will come back in some more detail to that in due course. Moving on with your report then, I intend to go fairly quickly through figures 6 and 7. Perhaps you can just look at them even just in the printed versions, and they're at page 0940 and 0941. So, turning to figure 6 at 0940,
What tab again?
it's tab 2, I beg your pardon, Your Honours.
But before we go back to tab 2, since we've discussed 0957, this will be a good place to put it in.
Yes, thank you, Your Honours. May I ask then that this also be exhibited as the next in the prosecution exhibits. This is the A3 document at tab 6 of the binder.
I take it no objections from Defence Counsel?
No objection, Mr. President.
And Your Honours.
The document is admitted into the evidence at this point.
Le document KEN OTP 00920957.
57. Document, public document, will give the number EVD TOTP 00049.
Thank you, Your Honours. So I see we have on the screens, but for our purposes we can just look at the paper copy. Is it correct that figure 6 again depicts the destruction of various buildings, including what appears to be a large blue-roofed structure visible on the before picture at the top?
Correct.
And in this particular case, there appears to have been burnt vegetation. Can you point that out on the bottom image?
It's indicated by the blue arrow directly below the blue roof structure.
And is that what we would be looking at if we were seeing widespread wildfires, that sort of thing on a larger scale?
Yes, sort of. Those were trees which were burned, which are obviously a bit more vegetation than the surrounding grass and scrub. But yeah, essentially, if you saw a kind of a continuous area like that, that would be indicative of a wildfire.
And once again, is it correct that interspersed amongst the red dots on the lower image, the destroyed structures, are various other structures which appear to be untouched?
Yes.
Moving on then to figure 7. Again, just another example of 3 definitely burned structures, correct?
Yes, and in particular, these were some of the most isolated structures, so literally nothing, no other vegetation burning in the area.
I see. And then of more interest to me is figure 8. Where you've indicated in the center of the picture, running sort of top to bottom, 4 definitively burnt structures, correct?
Correct.
You're talking about the date of the 4th.
Yes, I'm talking about the picture on the lower picture, Your Honours. And what can you tell the court about the burnt areas surrounding these buildings?
So this is where the vegetation burn directly around the burned structures has been a lot more intense. That's the blackened vegetation remains of whatever grass was there before. To the top and to the right, that may indeed be some sort of agricultural burning, or it may have been piles of agricultural detritus that caught on fire during this burning.
And what can you tell about the age of this burn?
These would be extremely recent. The ash is all still completely the ash is still visible and present. The black and burn around the buildings is still purely black. The surrounding possible agricultural burns might be slightly older, just based on the fact that they're not as deep and black as the burns around the buildings.
And again, when you say extremely recent, can you put a time frame on that?
Again, that's difficult, but I would say this had been within a week of the image being collected.
Thank you. May we move on then to figure 9 at page 0943. The upper image is described as being an image of the Eldoret Cathedral on the 4th of January 2008, correct?
Correct.
And can you tell the court what you observed on that image from your analysis?
So in this particular example, in the PDF, I didn't provide the pre-image. This is only the post-image from 4 January 2008. But again, based on the image comparison that I used for the rest of the analysis, you essentially just notice an awful lot of activity at this particular location. Multiple cars, some light trucks, possibly some buses. It's possible that there's people visible on the grounds of the cathedral as well, but basically there's a lot going on, a lot of vehicles certainly, and a lot of activity there at that time.
Figure 10, the Kamumu Cathedral doesn't... Well, can you tell us about that? It doesn't appear to have nearly as much activity.
Correct. At the time of the image acquisition, there's no vehicles on the grounds of the cathedral. There are some vehicles nearby on the roads, but that cathedral essentially looks empty.
And the final image for this report, figure 11, is described as being an image of the Langas police station on the 4th of January 2008, correct?
Correct.
And please tell the court what you observed in that image.
Again, doing the comparison method, in this particular image, you're now seeing a large number of cars, trucks, definitely some dump trucks, which you can, or panel trucks, which you can identify by the shadows on their particular shadow pattern, and possibly some buses as well. Where the blue arrow indicates is either a large crowd of people, or essentially a collection of things, for lack of a better word. But that field changed considerably between the two images. So you're seeing an awful lot of material which is now in that field. I would say that some of what you see there is certainly people, but a lot of it is also just other things. It may be shelters or belongings or something like that.
Thank you. And then moving on to your conclusions, Mr. Bromley, what did you conclude at the end of your analysis of this data?
Again, after reviewing the entire image, there's essentially ample evidence of a lot of structural burning in and around the areas I was provided by the ICC. Again, 506 buildings definitively burned, in my opinion, and an additional 190 buildings possibly burned in the imagery, in my opinion. In this sort of analysis, we always know we're not identifying 100% of everything that's in the image. You're always going to miss some. Basically, if shadows from trees block it, or if some other factor doesn't allow you to see a structure, you may miss it, or if it's just not clear. But without a doubt, the 506 buildings that we identified were almost certainly burned. Again, the MODIS assessment indicates that at least some of the MODIS fire detections were directly proximate and intersecting the burned building, the burned buildings as well.
And what conclusion can you draw from that as to the dates of the burning?
So the MODIS detections are very precisely time-stamped down to the millisecond of acquisition. So the MODIS detections that occurred on those dates were detected at that time. In terms of the QuickBird image, the optical image that we located all the destroyed structures in, then it's a little bit more speculative, but essentially the level, the intensity of the blackness of the soot and the presence of ash indicates that the burning was very recent. I would say within the previous week, 5 days, some sort of time frame like that.
So in your expert opinion, the acquisition dates of the MODIS data being the 3rd of January, the 1st of January, 1st of January, 1st of January, 1st of January, and 1st of January. I'm just reading the dates on Exhibit 0957. Would those be consistent with the observable burning patterns that you detected in your analysis?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Romney. I think that's all for now with the Eldoret report. I can move to the second report you provided us, which is at tab 3 of your binder.
Before we go there, back to Exhibit 957. Was that what you said? It's at tab 6.
0957.
Yeah.
0957.
That's ERN number, not the exhibit number. ERN 0957. Why do we have a different date on the same photo? I see that the ID number 20883 indicates date of the 3rd of January 2008, and the rest indicate the 1st of January 2008.
So those, sir, are just two different dates of the fire detection. So the majority were detected on 1 January, but that particular one was detected on 3 January.
Thank you.
Very well. Tab 3. I see that we are approaching the lunch break, so perhaps we could do the admission of the documents for the Kiamba imagery.
What tab is that?
It's tab 3, Your Honours. And if I can just get the witness to confirm, I think you've confirmed all 4 of your reports, but you again confirm that this document at KenOTP 00921380 is your report, and you confirm the correctness?
Yes.
Your Honours, together with this, we will be referring to the appendix separately contained at tab 11, which is again Appendix C, Annotated Atlas of Kiamba, much shorter than the previous one, and that is KenOTP OTP 00921402. If I could ask that these could please be given the next two prosecution exhibit numbers.
Defense.
Sorry, there is one more, Your Honours, if I may interrupt. As with the previous one at tab 7, there is a larger A3 image of one of the figures contained in the report, and that is Ken OTP 00921401. And there is likewise an unannotated version of the KenyaMOJA Atlas, which has not been printed for the same reasons.
All right, let's take it one at a time. First, we deal with tab 3. That is the analysis of satellite imagery for KenyaMOJA Church, Kenya, as of
ERN 1380. Yes, thank you.
yes. Okay. Defense, any objection?
No objection.
None, Your Honours.
The document is admitted as the next of the prosecution exhibits.
Court officer. Document Ken OTP 00921380. Public document will be assigned number EVD TOTP 00050.
What is the next one?
Your Honours, the next one will be tab 11, Appendix C, the annotated atlas, Ken OTP 00921402.
Any objections?
No objection.
None, Your Honour.
That document is also admitted as the next of the prosecution exhibits.
Court officer. Document Ken OTP 00921402. A public document will be assigned the number EVD TOTP 00051.
You say there's another one, Mr. Steinberg?
Two more, in fact, Your Honours. So the following would be the unannotated KenyaMOJA Atlas. The ERN number is 00921457.
Is it in the bundle here?
No, Your Honours, this is the corresponding unannotated version of the document at tab 11, which has not been printed.
So it is in the CD-ROM? What?
It is in the CD-ROM, which we will come to in due course, but it is also uploaded in eCourt, so it can be exhibited directly from eCourt.
No objection.
No objection.
It is admitted as the next of the
Mr. President, if it helps, we are not objecting to any of the documents going in.
All right, so we'll just admit them as the prosecution brings them up. That's good to know. Mr. Kiginkatwa, the same for you?
Yes, Your Honour.
Thank you.
Court officer. Documents Ken OTP 00921457 will be assigned the reference number EVDT OTP 00052.
Thank you. Then finally, Your Honours, the A3 image at tab 7 is Ken OTP 00921401.
That too comes in at the next of the prosecution exhibit.
Court officer. Document Ken OTP 00921401 will be assigned the reference number EVDT OTP 00053.
Thank you, Your Honours, and that would appear to bring us rather neatly to the lunch adjournment.
Yes, we will take our lunch break now. Witness, we will revert. You will join us again at 2:30. In light of the subject matter, defense, it is my intention to allow the prosecution to, if they need to clean up anything with the witness during breaks, to do that.
No objection.
No difficulty with that, Mr. King? Yes. So you've got what this direction is. So if there's any need for you to discuss with the witness with a view to narrowing anything down or clarifying anything in the meantime.
Mr. President, I misunderstood you. We would have a bit of a difficulty with regards to that, unless, of course, if your honors insist. And
that's what we intend to do. We will not be applying the same.
But we think it would be a bit inappropriate, considering also that we have already disclosed our material, and it would be obvious what our lines of questioning would be. But we stand guided by your honors. We wouldn't create any difficulties with that. But we think that it's definitely not the way to proceed under the circumstances. Thank you.
Because you've already disclosed your...
Yes, Mr.
I see.
President, yes.
Right.
And our lines of questioning would be very obvious. We do not wish the prosecution to be given an opportunity to sit with the witness somewhere and clear those issues. Thank you.
Your Honours, I can certainly give an undertaking. I have not seen the documents yet, but I have no intention of discussing defence documents with the witness.
But nonetheless,
the concern
it's
is
inappropriate.
Mr. Fowl is we have asked the prosecution to narrow down areas, and then it should be possible for us to trust the prosecution not to do anything untoward.
We will continue to be very cooperative, Mr. President.
Thank you. We will leave it at that. Prosecution, your responsibility as a lawyer is implicated in all of this. Thanks. We will take our lunch break now and come back at 2:30.
All rise. We will away.